House on Clover Hill Road still smelled like my mother's lavender sachets when we buried her on a Thursday in late October. I remember standing at the graveside in a coat I'd borrowed from my coworker because I hadn't owned anything black and formal in years. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from the cold. It wasn't even that cold. Just from the strange, hollowed-out feeling of watching them lower the woman who used to braid my hair every Sunday morning into the ground, knowing that when I turned around, I'd have to face my brother. My brother Raymond, and his wife Candace. I should start at the beginning because none of what happened makes sense without it. My mother, Helen, raised the two of us alone after our father left when I was 4, and Raymond was 9. She worked as a bookkeeper for a small construction firm for 31 years. She clipped coupons. She bought store brand everything. She drove a 2009 Civic until 2 years before she died, and even then she only traded it in because the transmission went and the mechanic told her fixing it would cost more than the car was worth. She was careful with every dollar she ever earned, and over the course of her life, she had quietly, steadily built something real. The house on Clover Hill Road was paid off. She had a savings account with just over $190,000 in it, and she had a life insurance policy, $150,000, that she'd been paying into since Raymond and I were teenagers. She'd told me about the will. Not in detail, but enough. She said she wanted things split evenly between us, that she'd talked to an attorney, that everything was in order. I believed her. I had no reason not to. I was 31 when she died. I'm a registered nurse. I work long shifts. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment 40 minutes from where I grew up, and I had been driving to my mother's house every weekend for the last 2 years to help her as her health got worse. Grocery runs, medication management, doctor's appointments. I rearranged my schedule around hers. I took unpaid days when she had procedures. I did it because she was my mother and I loved her, not because I expected anything in return. Raymond lived 45 minutes in the other direction. He came for Thanksgiving and Christmas, sometimes Easter. He called her on her birthday. He was busy, he said. He had his kids, his job, his life. I never said anything about it to her because it wasn't my place, and I never said anything to him because what would have been the point. But I noticed, and somewhere in the back of my mind I filed it away. The week after the funeral, Raymond called me. "We need to talk about the estate," he said. No preamble. No, how are you holding up? Just that. I told him I knew she had an attorney, a man named Mr. Pelletier who had an office downtown, and that we should probably reach out to him about next steps. There was a pause on the line. Then Raymond said, "I already talked to him." I didn't understand why that felt wrong at the time. I just knew that it did. We met at the house 4 days later. Raymond and Candace arrived together. I got there first and sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, listening to the heat click on, looking at my mother's rooster collection on the shelf above the window. She'd been collecting those ceramic roosters for as long as I could remember. Every one of them had a story: a flea market in Georgia, a little shop in Vermont, a birthday gift from a neighbor who'd since moved to Arizona. Raymond walked in and didn't look at them once. He sat down across from me and put a manila folder on the table. Candace stood slightly behind him with her arms crossed. She wasn't looking at me either. She was looking at the kitchen, at the cabinets, at the light fixture, at the floor. "There's a problem," Raymond said. He told me that when he'd spoken with Mr. Pelletier, there had been a complication with the will. He said the attorney had concerns about whether the document was valid, that there might be questions about our mother's mental state in the last year of her life. I set down my coffee cup very carefully. "What are you talking about?" I said. "She had dementia, Savannah." He said my name the way he used to when we were kids, and he was trying to explain something he thought I was too young to understand. Patient. Slightly condescending. "You know she wasn't herself at the end. The will she had on file is from 4 years ago, but she made some changes last year, and Candace and I think those changes need to be looked at." I looked at Candace. She finally looked back at me. Her expression was completely unreadable. "Mom did not have dementia," I said. "I was with her every week. She was sharp until the last 2 months, and even then it was the medication that made her foggy, not—" "You're not a doctor," Raymond said. "You're a nurse." There it was. I want to explain something about the months that followed, because from the outside I think it probably looked like a straightforward legal dispute. 2 adult children disagreeing over an estate. It happens all the time. But what Raymond and Candace did wasn't a disagreement. It was a campaign. It started small. Raymond told my mother's neighbor, Dottie, a woman my mother had been close to for 20 years, that I'd been managing her finances in the last year and that there were some irregularities he was concerned about. He said it in a way that was technically not an accusation, but that planted a seed. Dottie mentioned it to someone at their church. That someone mentioned it to someone else. Within 6 weeks of my mother's death, I was hearing, through people I'd known my entire life, that I had possibly taken advantage of her. I hadn't touched her finances. I'd helped her pay bills online twice when her eyesight made reading the screen difficult. She'd been the one to enter her own password. I was right there beside her. But I had no way to prove that, and Raymond knew it. He also filed a formal challenge to the will through Mr. Pelletier's office, arguing that the updated document, the one that reflected my mother's wishes after she'd reconsidered some of the distribution following a long conversation we'd had about my plan to eventually buy a house, was invalid due to undue influence. The undue influence, according to his filing, was me. The legal fees started. I hired an attorney, a woman named Miss Okafor, who was calm and precise and told me my case was strong, but that strong in probate court still meant months of waiting and thousands of dollars. I was working extra shifts to cover the retainer. I was exhausted. I was grieving. I was trying to hold all of it together, and some days I honestly wasn't sure I could. Candace, in the meantime, had started making comments to my mother's side of the family. She was strategic about it. She never said anything outright. She asked questions. Have you noticed how much time Savannah was spending over there? Do you think it's a little strange that she was the only one with access to the house? I just worry that she was lonely and maybe she made the relationship into something it wasn't. My cousin Renata called me crying one night because Candace had implied at a family dinner I hadn't been invited to that my mother and I hadn't actually had a good relationship at the end, that things had been tense, that my mother had confided worries to her. My mother had never even liked Candace. She'd told me so, once, on a night when we were watching TV and Raymond had canceled a visit at the last minute for the 3rd time in a row. She hadn't said it bitterly. She'd said it the way you say something you've accepted about a person. I just don't think she's very warm, Savannah. That was all. I held on to that. The worst night came on a Saturday in February, about 4 months after the funeral. I had driven out to the house because I still had my key and Ms. Okafor had advised me to document the property's condition for the estate proceeding. I was going through my mother's bedroom, carefully, with my phone taking photos, when I heard a car in the driveway. Raymond and Candace came in through the front door without knocking. I met them in the hallway. "What are you doing here?" he said. The way he said it, like I was a stranger. Like this wasn't the house where I'd learned to ride a bike in the backyard, and burned my hand on the stove at age 7, and sat up crying at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning while my mother made me tea after a bad breakup. "I'm documenting the property," I said. "Ms. Myrna, Okafor recommended you need to leave. Raymond, I have just as much legal right to be here as you do. The estate is still in probate." He took a step toward me. I remember thinking he looked different than he ever had before. Not angry exactly, just decided, like he had already made up his mind about something and was now simply carrying it out. "Sign the agreement," he said. "The one Pelletier sent over. Walk away from the update, take the original split, and this is done." The original split meant I would receive exactly what the 4-year-old will allocated, before our mother had updated it to account for the fact that Raymond's financial situation had significantly improved, while mine had not, before she'd specifically told me she wanted me to have the house, which I was to buy out Raymond's share of, at a below-market rate she had calculated herself. Walking away from the update meant losing the house entirely. Raymond would sell it. I knew he would. He'd already said as much to Renata. "No," I said. He closed the distance between us. He wasn't shouting. That's the thing I want you to understand. He was very quiet. He grabbed my arm and pushed me back against the wall, hard enough that my shoulder hit the doorframe and I felt it crack through my whole side. "You have taken everything from her," he said. "You were there every week and you worked on her and you turned her against us, and you don't get to win this." I tried to pull away. He didn't let go. "Raymond, stop. Sign it." Candace was standing at the end of the hallway. She hadn't moved. She was looking at the two of us with an expression, I had never seen on anyone's face in real life before. Not panic, not hesitation. She looked at him and she said, very quietly, very calmly, like she was reminding him to pick up dry cleaning, "She's not going to sign it standing up, Ray. Put her down." Something in me went completely still. I don't know how to explain it except to say that I had spent the last 4 months being worn down by the legal battle, by the rumors, by the grief, by the isolation, by watching my mother's memory be used as a weapon against me. And in that moment, hearing Candace say those words in that tone, something in me didn't break. It calcified. I stopped fighting him. I went still. And because he wasn't expecting that, he loosened his grip for just a second. That was enough. I shoved him back with everything I had, got past him down the hallway, grabbed my purse from the kitchen counter, and got out the front door. I sat in my car in the driveway, shaking so hard I couldn't get the key in the ignition. I called 911. Then I called Ms. Okafoyer. The officers who came took my statement in the driveway. My shoulder had a contusion. I photographed it that night at home, and the ER confirmed a minor soft tissue injury 2 days later when I finally went because the pain wasn't going away. Raymond told the officers I had become aggressive and that he had been trying to restrain me. Candace confirmed his account. It was my word against theirs. But here's what Candace had not considered. My mother, in the last year of her life, had experienced some issues with a neighboring property, a drainage problem that had led to a minor flooding incident in the basement. She had installed a small security camera system, the kind you buy at a hardware store, positioned to cover the backyard and the side of the house where the drainage ran. She had never mentioned it to Raymond. She had mentioned it to me once in passing, when she was annoyed that the footage storage was getting full and she didn't know how to clear it. I had forgotten about it completely until I was sitting in my apartment 3 nights after the incident at the house, going through every possible thing I could bring to Ms. Okafor, and it came back to me like a door swinging open. The camera was positioned at the corner of the house. It covered the side yard, but it also covered partially the hallway window. The footage was still there. 60 days of roll-in storage. The incident in the hallway had happened 41 days prior. It wasn't perfect. The angle was partial. The audio was faint but present. And what it captured was a woman standing calmly at the end of a hallway while a man pressed another woman against a wall. And then, clearly, the sound of Candace's voice and what she said. Miss Okafor called it the best thing she'd seen in a contested estate case in 15 years of practice. Raymond's attorney withdrew the undue influence challenge 6 weeks later. The updated will was admitted to probate. The life insurance proceeds and the savings account were distributed according to my mother's wishes. The house on Clover Hill Road became mine. Raymond did not speak to me at the proceeding. Candace looked at the table the entire time. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I had spent nearly 7 months in the worst sustained stress of my adult life. I had watched my brother try to erase the last version of my mother that had existed, the one who had sat down with an attorney and made deliberate, loving choices about who she wanted to leave things to, and replace it with a version that served him. And there was a grief in that the legal outcome didn't fix. I moved into the house in April. The first night, I slept in my old bedroom, which still had the same curtains my mother had hung when I was in middle school, a pale yellow with small white flowers. I lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle, and tried to just let myself feel it. All of it. The relief and the sadness and the anger that still hadn't finished moving through me. The rooster collection was still on the shelf in the kitchen. I hadn't moved a single one. People asked me sometimes whether I would ever forgive Raymond, whether Candace. I think about it more than I expected to. I don't think forgiveness has to mean reconciliation. I don't think it has to mean pretending the thing didn't happen or that the people who did it are different than they showed themselves to be. My mother used to say that you can love someone and still know exactly who they are. She was talking about my father when she said it, but I think she would understand me applying it here. What I know is this: I am 32 years old. I am a nurse. I own the house where I learned everything that mattered. And on Sunday mornings, sometimes I make coffee and I stand at the kitchen window and look at my mother's roosters on the shelf, and I think about the woman who collected them one by one over 30 years, from flea markets and little shops and neighbors who moved away. The woman who was careful with every dollar and every feeling and every word she ever put into a legal document. She knew what she wanted. She said it clearly, and in the end, it stood. I've thought a lot about what made Raymond do what he did. Not to excuse it, I'm long past needing to make sense of it that way, but because I think understanding it honestly is the only way to actually learn something from it. He didn't become that person in the hallway overnight. That version of him, the one who grabbed his sister's arm in their dead mother's house and told her to sign away what their mother had carefully, deliberately chosen to leave. That version had been building for years. Every time he didn't show up. Every time he let distance become habit. Every time he looked at what our mother had and calculated his share of it rather than just being her son. The person he was in that hallway was the sum of 1,000 smaller choices he'd made long before she got sick. That's what I mean when I say actions accumulate. Not in any mystical sense, just practically, in the most ordinary human way. Who you choose to be in the small moments is who you are when the large ones arrive. Raymond had been choosing convenience over presence for years, and when the moment came that required something real from him, he had nothing left to give except want. Candace is a different kind of study. What she said in that hallway, the way she said it, has stayed with me because it revealed something I don't think she meant to show. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even particularly invested in the outcome emotionally. She was managing a situation. That kind of cold calculation, dressed up as partnership, is its own form of moral failure. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly makes the worst version of the person beside it more possible. What I'm proudest of, looking back, is not that I won the legal case. It's that I didn't become someone I wasn't in order to survive it. There were months where I was exhausted and humiliated and genuinely scared that the lies they were spreading would stick. There were nights I wanted to fight dirty, to call people and say things about Raymond that were true but that I was using as weapons rather than facts. I didn't. Not because I'm particularly noble, but because I knew my mother would have seen it. Not literally. She was gone. But the version of her I carry with me would have seen it, and I wasn't willing to trade that. I think that's what resilience actually is, when you strip away the way the word gets used. It's not toughness. It's not refusing to feel things. It's knowing what you're made of, well enough that even when someone is trying to rewrite who you are, to convince a neighborhood, a family, a courtroom that you're something you're not, you don't start to believe them. You stay legible to yourself. The camera footage wasn't luck, exactly. My mother had installed it for a practical reason, told me about it in passing, and I'd filed it away without knowing I'd ever need it. But I think there's something worth saying about the fact that the truth was already there. It had been there the whole time. Raymond and Candace built their entire strategy on the assumption that there would be no record, that it would be their word against mine, that the story they told would be the only story available. They forgot. Or maybe never considered that my mother had been a careful woman, a woman who paid attention to the details of her own life and protected what she'd built. I am her daughter. I learned that from her. And in the end, that was enough.